há 30 anos no curso Justiça, na Universidade de Harvard, o filósofo Michael Sandel usa questões do dia a dia para discutir com os alunos os valores éticos. O curso virou livro e uma série de vídeos que se tornou um dos maiores sucessos da internet, vista por milhões de pessoas em todo o mundo. O curso é pioneiro no projeto visionário de Sandel, a globalização da educação. Ele vem ao Brasil em agosto e recebeu o milênio em Harvard para discutir política, corrupção, desigualdade social, democracia e justiça.
Well, the main thing that's happening in Brazil is the emerging middle class. Tens of millions of people who were poor who are now middle class. So this emerging, we are very proud of that.
Yes.
But at the same time, inequality, the deep inequality that existed in Brazil is still there.
Right.
So you have a very small number of very rich people. It's as if they live in a different country. There's no sense of community, maybe.
Right.
What do you think of that?
Right. Well, the gap between rich and poor is one of the central questions of justice. And we see it in many countries, including this one, a growing gap between rich and poor. One approach, one tradition, is the pure laissez-faire, individualist, free market position, which says, if you buy and sell your skills, your goods on the free market, you are entitled to keep whatever you earn, and it would be wrong for the government to tax away your hard-earned money. That's one tradition. Then there's another tradition that says, no, that's not true, that inequality often reflects unfairnesses built in to our starting points in society. Some people are born into affluent families, some to poor families. Some have great educational opportunities. Others have little or no chance for a good education. And so the second tradition says the way to think about justice and inequality is for us to ask, all right, suppose you didn't know where you would wind up in society. You didn't know if you would be rich or poor, strong or weak, healthy or unhealthy. Then, what principles of justice would you agree to if you didn't know where you would wind up yourself? So that's the second tradition, and it leads to a more egalitarian system. And then the third tradition I discuss also worries about too great a gap between rich and poor, but for a different reason. Not only out of concern for the unfairness to those at the bottom who suffer the disadvantage, but also out of concern for community. It comes back to something you mentioned a moment ago. According to this tradition, the third tradition, if we have too great a gap between rich and poor, then it's very hard to sustain a sense of community, a sense that social life is a common project involving shared citizenship, where citizens feel a sense of obligation to one another because they're engaged in a common project. So there is this third tradition that worries about inequality from the standpoint of social cohesion, solidarity, and community.
But that looks like one example where there could be a common ground.
Well, the area where I would like to begin would be on the question we were discussing before, what to do about the rising inequality. In the United States, do you know what percentage of the wealth is held by the top 1%? What would you guess?
40%?
Yes. So you're very well
read your
informed.
book.
You're very well informed. Now, and Warren Buffett famously said recently that he actually pays less in taxes in a percentage basis than his secretary. I would like us, now that's an economic question on the face of it. What should the tax rate be? What should we do about the distribution of income and wealth? But it's not only an economic question. It's a question of justice. And to debate it as a question of justice and to do it well requires that we welcome people with different ethical views, different moral and even religious traditions to try to speak about what a just society looks like. So what we've had a lot in this country is the tendency to think Morality in politics, values in politics, that's only about abortion and same-sex marriage. Those are the two issues that come first to mind here when we think about bringing morality into politics, and usually that means morality is brought in by...
And then there's no common ground.
Yeah.
Polarization.
Well, there tends to be. But I think we should realize that the big economic questions that we face are questions of justice, they're questions about the good society, and we can't answer those questions without drawing on moral and ethical and spiritual traditions on which people will disagree, but at least we need to learn the habit of reasoning together in public, of listening to one another, addressing even traditions with which we may disagree in a way that is consistent with respect. Otherwise, I don't think we're going to address the question of inequality unless we make it a moral question, realize that it's a question of justice, and that everyone has to be free to bring to bear his or her moral and spiritual convictions on those